In the early 1820s, Germantown was nothing more than a slightly improved Indian trail. As settlers began to arrive in the region around Memphis, the Methodists sent in their missionaries and circuit riders. In 1820, the Tennessee Conference appointed Lewis Garrett, Jr. to cover the Southern Mission. He recorded more than 1,000 Methodists in the large area of the country below the South Fork of the Obion River. The settlement that would become Germantown became part of the Wolf Circuit. The goal of these early gatherings was to bring a civilizing morality to the area. By the 1830s, the area had produced two small communities along that former Indian trail, with the formal seat of the Civil District 11 moving to Germantown in 1836. As more religious-oriented citizens moved in, Germantown became a place to gather. The Methodists in the area, like other denominations, likely met in members' homes and were served by the preachers riding the Wolf Circuit. The emergence of a formal Methodist church began when John T. Nelson, an ordained Methodist elder, moved to the area. He served as what was called a local minister, not supported by the conference, but was expected to serve local needs in the absence of the circuit riders who would come through every few weeks. 1840 brought the emergence of the Memphis Conference and a big step for the Germantown congregation. In December of that year, approximately 45 members purchased an acre of land for $50 to build a church and develop a cemetery for the community. The first little church was built on the westernmost street of town and soon became known as Church Street, that is modern-day McVeigh Road. Described as a one-room building, it would have stood on brick pillars, sided with whitewashed planks, and roofed low with no steeple. Everything would have been built by members and most likely would have had windows and a single entrance. Today, where the original building is believed to have stood, there is an outdoor worship space honoring the first congregation and their building efforts. In the years following the construction of our first church building, we had a number of circuit riders and pastors service the area. The sermons of the time discussed morality issues. Dueling, adultery, and drunkenness were condemned, and even dancing was disapproved. These long-winded sermons would alternate between threats of hellfire and brimstone to restful appeals for sinners to abandon their immoral practices. At this time, the women were the foot soldiers of the church, but only men could lead the congregation and hold church office. Women and children made up 75% of the congregation, and it is suggested that their focus on ordinary vices served as a distraction from the real moral issue of the time, slavery. Our church had black members, and separate services were held for them by our pastors. As the slavery issues became a division in our country, it also divided the Methodist Church, and the Methodist Episcopal Church South was formed. Eventually, this division widened, and the country went to war with itself. During the Civil War, our church building was donated as a hospital, but after the Battle of Shiloh, federal occupation ensued, and thousands of soldiers were encamped in the area. Church services were forbidden during this time, and the three churches in our area served different purposes. The Baptist church was burned down, the Presbyterian church survived as a commissary, and our church was believed to have been used for storage. But 2 cold winters and an encamped regiment in the cemetery stripped off all the wood not securely attached. Methodists in the area reverted back to meeting in houses. After the Civil War, the damaged building was torn down and another modest building was erected, and the congregation began to grow again until the yellow fever epidemic hit the area and membership dwindled to only 50 members. In the 1880s, our little congregation had evangelism as its mission, and membership stayed relatively even as new people joined and others passed away or moved. In 1889, Germantown was set off as the seat of its own Methodist circuit, and in 1890, a parsonage was built on the adjoining lot to the north of the McVeigh property. A pastor was now located in town, but served 3 to 5 other congregations in his circuit. Records show that from 1900 to 1915, Germantown, Capelville, Mount Moriah Church, and Mullins Church were included in the same circuit. During this time, the church began to prosper, and in 1916, the trustees mortgaged the church land and built a new church, replacing the one built after the Civil War. The 5 years following the building of the new church, the city was in turmoil over its namesake as the United States entered World War I. It is said that soldiers on trains passing through Germantown pelted the station sign with mud balls. The city changed its name to Neshoba in 1917, but that was not the only large change to the members of the Germantown Methodist Church. In 1921, the new building was struck by lightning and burned down. In the early 20s, the trustees sold the original property on McVeigh Road and purchased the property where the current facility sits on Germantown Road. During the building of the chapel, Sunday school and worship service was held in a roof basement. This area still exists in our building today. By 1929, the chapel above had been completed and the house adjacent was used as the parsonage. By the early 1930s, there was only one other church in our circuit. In 1932, the Mount Moriah Methodist Church merged with Germantown Methodist. We often provided a wagon to transport children to Sunday school during this time. The congregation numbered 236 and began steady growth that matched that of the city of Germantown. During World War II, senior pastor Reverend Robert Horton wrote letters to local fighting men. Reverend Horton is pictured on the historic marker on Germantown Road. One of those letters survived, and the envelope with its 3-cent stamp contained a photo of the church choir and 2 Christmas programs from 1942 and 1943. Carols included a solo performance of O Holy Night and choir performances of Away in a Manger. Reverend Horton had all choir members sign the program. Following the war in 1947, a house to the south of the chapel was purchased and served as a parsonage, and the old parsonage north of the chapel was converted to Sunday school rooms before later being torn down. The 1950s saw the membership grow into the 400s, and fundraising began for additional expansion. During this time, the women of Germantown Methodist ran a country store in a used bus parked by Golson's Esso station on Poplar Avenue to raise money. A multi-purpose building was built to the north of the chapel. That area was used as a youth building, also used as a fellowship hall, and parts of it were used for Sunday school rooms. In 1960, the land between the church and 2nd Street was purchased for future development. A 2-story adult education building to the west of the chapel was completed in 1964. The parsonage south of the chapel was converted to a youth cottage in the early 1970s. By 1975, church membership had grown to over 700, and the small church building was bursting at the seams. On September 14, 1975, groundbreaking began on a new sanctuary and fellowship hall. In November of 1976, the congregation marched from the old chapel building to the new sanctuary. The new Mike Wilson Fellowship Hall was named for an outstanding Christian young man, active in our church until his untimely death in a railway crossing accident. The late 70s brought many changes to Germantown. McDonald's opened on Germantown Road north of Poplar, but you could still get fresh vegetables for lunch on Thursdays at the food fair held in the parking lot of Germantown Methodist. In the early 1980s, the purchase of the houses south of the parsonage gave the church ownership of the entire block. A new education wing was built in 1983, and extensive remodeling was done to the office wing, chapel, and adult education building. The church was growing fast and exceeded 1,700 members by the end of the 1980s. The decision was made to purchase the property across West Street from a church member. A multi-purpose building known as the Owings Life Enrichment Center was opened in 1989 on that property and named for Albert Owings. At this point, the old McVeigh Road Cemetery was falling into disrepair. In 1992, the property was reacquired, and the church members joined together to clean it up and build McVeigh Gardens. The area is now home to our counseling center, columbarium, and recently completed Trinity Worship Center. Membership continued growing in the 90s, soaring to 3,000. Expansion was needed again. Being landlocked and not wanting to move to a new location, the decision was made to expand to the north to 2nd Street, and the Hamilton Ministry Center was opened in 2004. Named for Dr. Ralph and Barbara Hamilton, this new section added a nursery, bride's room and parlor on the main level, Sunday school classes and offices on the 3rd floor, and a new welcome center and choir rehearsal room on the ground floor. In 2009, our campus expanded again east of Germantown Road, where we added the adult education building for hosting meetings and a growing number of Sunday school classes, and the cottage, a building providing many community functions like room at the inn, scouts, English as a second language classes, and various recovery groups. The latest addition in our long history came in 2013. A house on the Olek property was donated to the church and has been turned into a new youth building. This house harps back to the beginning of our church in both function and location. Over the years, as our church has grown, so have our ministries and our mission. What started as a small group of folks meeting in a house in the 1820s has grown into a church whose influence touches the world. Today's church members serve in many local and international missions. Ministries at all age levels are thriving, from preschool children to older adults. We're home to almost 20 Sunday school classes and a variety of prayer groups and small study groups. As Germantown United Methodist Church looks to the future, its members are guided by a simple motto: love, grow, serve. Love God and others, grow in Christ and share Him, and serve our community as faithful disciples. With these pillars of faith, Germantown United Methodist Church can stand strong for another 175 years.